So, hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Hodgson. And today I'm delighted to be joined by executive, founder, and author John Winsor. How are you doing, John?
I'm good. How you doing, Glenn?
I'm doing very well. So, John, just give us a little bit of a background on yourself, your steps that you've been taking on your journey, and how you got in to be the leading light into the future of work.
Well, that's a big, mantle to hold, the leading light of the future of work. Thank you so much. I suggest that, I've kind of entered this area a long time ago, mostly out of just my need as kind of a bootstrap entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I didn't have the ability to afford big staffs and or VC funding. So I had to figure out new solutions. And really, it was when I acquired a magazine called Women's Sports and Fitness back in the '80s. They had 40 editors in New York, and I just I really thought it was something that needed to exist. And shut the magazine down, but I couldn't afford to do that, and I put all my assets on the line to acquire it. And in order to make that happen, is I had to flip the paradigm, and that was instead of having the typical story of having a writer in New York fly to Boulder and interview somebody, let's just say a rock climber, Lynn Hill, and then go back and write a story. The writer might not be really familiar subject matter expert, so she could make some mistakes on exactly what the nuances are. My curiosity was story, and then have editors, to help edit it, a couple editors that could edit it, though really being experts in editing, not in sports. And that totally flipped the paradigm of the cost structure of the company. So having
Yeah.
this kind of abundant crowd of readers that could write stories. And that just set me on this journey of curiosity of, wow, couldn't we, like, why can't people participate? Like, why can't individuals participate in this? So that led to kind of the
Yeah.
formation of Victors and Spoils a few years later. I'd just come from Crispin Porter Bogusky, and we were the creative agency of the decade. We'd gone from 45 of us to about 1,200 of us in 2 years, which was a crazy ride. And,
Absolutely.
it's just no way to hire people fast enough, right? I just
Yeah.
asked the question of, well, why couldn't we just have 20 people in a Boulder office and then have the world to do work for us and
Yeah.
be able to pay on a project basis? And that worked really, really well. And that led me to Havas and trying to do that. And when I met Havas and David Jones, such an inspiring guy, we really saw Victors and Spoils and our technology as a way to digitally transform Havas. The problem is that I think, like in so many big entrepreneurial or big enterprises, they're really scared of change. It's like
Yeah.
General Szynski, right? Who likes to say, if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even more. And I think you've seen that play out in the advertising business, right? I mean, I can't
Yes.
believe, but some of these big global agencies that were based in London and New York, that were really my heroes kind of in the marketing world, they're just gone because
Yeah.
they didn't realize that the world had changed, and not just the employment models. And I think now we're facing the same kind of issue, right? There's an existential crisis. Like, what is AI going to do to work, not just workforce, but you and I were on that call yesterday, and I really thought
Yeah.
that Jeff Schwartz laid it out really well. It's not redesign of the workforce or the redesign of employment. It's actually the redesign of work. That's what we're talking about. And so I'm really fascinated to see how that plays out. And one of the things I'm really intrigued with is who has the upper leg, right? And I
Mm.
was on with Ben. Do you know Ben Plummer from Invincible?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So Ben, he's such a great guy, really smart, and we were just talking about the idea that I think we agreed that freelancers almost are at an advantage, because if I was betting on people going to the future, I would always bet for people that are learners, right? Like, who's
Mm.
learning the fastest, who's learning the most. And I would suggest that freelancers, or at least the data shows that freelancers spend about 15% of their time learning new skills, where at least in the US, the average enterprise gives their workers about 0.3% of their salary to learn job specific skills.
Yeah.
So it's just such a gulf in the speed of learning. If you're a graphic designer, you've got to incorporate the latest, Figma or Canva or, AI tools to help you do work better and faster. If you're
Mm.
inside a company, you're kind of following the company rules, and you do what they tell you to do and use the tools that they provide. But I think, we're really standing at this abyss of future of work, and there's so much stuff that needs to be figured out.
And it really does, John. I think that also sort of, conversations that we've had as well, and also Jeff in on this, the element of, well, what are the skills that we need? And this is one of the things that we've been discussing for a while now, because everyone's saying, oh, there's a need for reskilling and upskilling, and to be basically do well what computers don't do, or to be in sync with AI. And I think this idea of being able to learn, continue to learn, and be
Mhm.
flexible as key skills that individuals need to really be on top of what's happening and to flourish in the future of work. And the future of work, when I say that, it's like it's now and into the future. It's no longer the future of work 5, 6, 7 years ahead. It's here and
Yeah,
now, and people need to get to grips with it.
I agree. I think, and I think speaking of Jeff, one of the things I love is the work that he's doing with Gloat, because really, I think that's where it starts. There's this, I think, historical arrogance in kind of the HR industrial complex that, will
Yeah,
determine what's best for our workers, right? We'll
yeah,
determine the best upskilling. We'll determine, when they can take vacation, when they can work, the hours, all those things. Whereas I think, what with the ideas of internal talent marketplaces that I fortunately had a lot of time spent, researching for the book. But I love what Gloat's doing. They're actually flipping the paradigm, saying, well, it's really the individuals, the workers' job to control their own destiny and control their
yeah.
own career, and then to have a ecosystem of learning opportunities and jobs and work opportunities. And could you set something up like that so that it allows you to um, give workers the best opportunity in the future. I get the sense. I just wrote a piece in HBR this morning about kind
Yeah.
of ways to accelerate your career, and the thing that I really talked about was, let's be transparent as leaders. Let's say, hey, team, go out and work with AI. Go out and hire yourself. Go do side gigs. Go learn.
Mm,
Do what you want to do. And if you want to stay around here, awesome. If you don't, that's totally cool too. But go pursue your passion, because if you're passionate about something, you're willing to learn it a lot more. And I
yeah.
think that's the system. So if you're not trying to control and own your workforce anymore, and you're saying, even my internal workforce, go flourish, and
Yeah.
and hopefully we have a relationship that allows me to benefit from that, then it's a whole different way of thinking about leading, right? Like, how do I lead in
Mm.
this world where I might have 2 full-time employees on my team, I might have 3 remote workers, I might have 7 freelancers, and I've got an AI bot that's willing to do anything, right? And like, that's a whole different skill set as a leader.
Yeah, it is, and I think that the changing face of leadership is a crucial element as well, John, because it's no longer the hierarchical top down. I do this, you do it, and you do it as quickly as possible. As I say, it's more of a network. You can't tell people what to do. You have to show them. You have to sort of deal with full-time employees, some contractors, freelancers, open talent. So this kind of matrix approach that you need sort of different skills as a leader as well.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, I always turn my attention to places like Patagonia, right?
Yeah.
I've known Yvonne forever, and one of the things I love is that Patagonia from the very beginning, because he was a dirtbag climber, and he would rather be climbing versus working, and so that's the culture he created. Is like,
Yeah.
if it's good ski day, let's all go skiing. Let's forget about building this clothing stuff. And so, now that he's gotten to be fairly good sized, that culture still exists. And one of the questions, I don't know if you get, but I get a lot, is like, well, if people don't work, if we can't set the terms of their employment, what does that do to our culture? And my feeling and my example always Patagonia is like, I think you misunderstand culture. Like, culture should be way bigger than you and your employees. It should be your customer and your
Yeah.
suppliers, and you setting a tone with everybody that comes in contact with you, right? And so
Mm.
that's what it needs to be, right? Culture needs to be broad, and our lens for what culture is needs to be really broad. And instead of saying, like, I saw this crazy thing on NPR, National Public Radio in the States, and it just made me laugh. It was like people were trying to figure out how to get people to return to work, right? Return to office. And so one of the
Yeah.
things some company in New York was doing is that they're a shoe manufacturer. So their secret sauce was they redesigned the office to look like shoe boxes. And on Wednesday nights, they had a mandatory pizza party that people needed to come to.
Oh,
And
wow.
you're just, what does that have to do with fulfillment and learning and,
Yeah.
like advancing careers? And it's just, I think there's just a really mismatch between what leaders are thinking and the way that the way that that workers are kind of desire to work in the
Mm.
future.
Yeah, and it's going to be talent led, John, as well, isn't it? I mean, there's
Hmm.
no way we want this, do this. There is a talent shortage in so many different sectors. So it's basically keeping the open talent happy in terms of when, where, and how they want to be able to work, giving them the incentives, and being able to get them on board. And a lot of those cases, it's not a 9 to 5. It's not a open-ended contract. It's part of a portfolio of activities.
I agree. I mean, I think that the thing that really intrigues me now is like, and we were talking about it before the podcast, is like, why isn't, is biology about doing this? Why isn't there a $50 billion industry
Yeah.
company in this industry? I totally have the same curiosity, but I also contextualize a little bit different. I think that maybe our lens, possibly our lens of open talent is too narrow because you've got this industry of creators that creators globally on social media platforms selling marketing services sell about
Yeah.
$265 billion worth of work. And one of the things that interests me in the US is that if you look at the rank of industries, the railroad transportation industry does about $40 billion of revenue, and two below that is the total furniture industry in the US that does about $35 billion. But sitting
Okay.
between the two of those is YouTube creators creating $37 billion worth of marketing materials. So
Wow.
that
Yeah.
industry, we don't even, in the US, we don't even count that in towards our GDP. And so it's changing the mindset to say, wow, there's all this really interesting economic activity that's going on. Work's being defined in a totally new way for a lot of millennials that make money as independent contractors or creators. And
Yeah.
maybe one of the things we need to think about is like, maybe it's not just, and somebody brought this up to me the other day, and I thought it was brilliant. Maybe it's not just creators in the context of creating marketing materials, but it's creators in the context of doing work that I want to be creative in the work I do. I want to,
Yeah.
have a portfolio career where maybe I work 3 days a week for a company, but I, work for a nonprofit and I do what I'm skilled at for them. And I,
Yeah.
take time off to pursue things with my family, but I have this kind of this mashup because I can now. I've got these digital platforms and AI tools that allow me to do so much more.
Yeah, no, absolutely the case. And it's sort of the self-fulfillment for the individuals themselves, but also the companies, organizations, the enterprises actually benefit from this as well, because if you've got sort of various different roles, that those skills, knowledge, and expertise won't be siloed. You will learn from the different projects. It'll be speeded up. You'll get sort of the feedback, and you'll have new skills that you'll be able to utilize for other projects and other partners as well.
I totally agree. I mean, I think one of the things we have to overcome is there's this kind of bureaucratic organizational structure that nobody really knows who's in charge. I
Yeah.
gave a speech to a bunch of CHROs, and the woman who introduced me was the CHRO of NYU. She just took over and she said, this is amazing. I haven't really worked in the open talent space, she was saying, but she said it's so pertinent because right now, as her CHRO on her leadership team, she needs a data scientist about a sixth of the time. She said, I know 5 other places inside NYU that need a data scientist, not full time, but to do project work. And she said, unfortunately, our quote unquote bureaucracy of NYU, which I don't know how to control, even though I'm the CHRO, mandates that we hire 6 full-time data scientists to do the work.
Right.
And so there's
Okay.
this really mismatch of the jobs that need to be done and the kinds of hiring policies that are pretty archaic these days. And so
Yeah.
how do we get that closer? How do we kind of not think about jobs and roles, but shift to like what skills need to be done so that tasks can be accomplished to get the outcomes we need?
Yeah, absolutely.
It could be some guy, in a corner who's a researcher might be brilliant at something that nobody even knows about because
Mm,
he's a gamer at night and he might build scenarios, in alternative worlds that could
yeah.
benefit the organization if they only knew, if they only kind of were open to that, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Well, this is a beautiful segue into, of course, Open Talent, the book, which has now
Ah,
been released. It's out there, John. So, I mean, this is a labor of love, and it really sort of brings together a lot of your sort of thinkings and thoughts. And you've co-authored this book, so it'd be great if you could just sort of tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about it and some of the hypotheses that you've come to from the work that you've done in producing this.
yeah, well, thanks. You've been a big part of that journey, and obviously the whole Open Assembly community. It wouldn't have happened without the community. So, like I said, my career has been more as a entrepreneur
Mm,
who, bootstrapped, who kind of used open talent as a way to solve business problems, and then the lab, concurrently, Kareem, Connie, and Jim Pike were doing work around working for NASA. NASA in 2007 had a massive budget cut of 80%, and Jeff Davis had to figure out alternative ways to keep astronauts alive in space.
yeah,
And so they were on that track of building NASA's Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. I was doing my stuff when we joined because Kareem wrote a couple of case studies about my work. And I was really fascinated by that. And one of the goals really was around, how do we create common language and common process around this? If we're really going to see it scale, I would propose or suggest that, the industries that scale are the ones that get the standards and the information right. So if you look at, when things like Wi-Fi came about, it was really the Wi-Fi standard setting body that made sure that everybody was coordinated. They kind of
yeah.
used common language, a common process. Same thing happened in cloud computing. Same thing that's happening in AI, doing a pretty good job. Alternatively, our little space of open talent really is kind of the Wild West, right? Every platform, the 1,000 platforms, say they do something different, talk
Yeah.
about their work differently. Some are, willing to do work for enterprises that do compliance and security. Others aren't. It's a real hodgepodge of systems. And so the goal of the book was really to create common language, a common process
Yeah.
around the industry. And so with that said, one of the things that we did is we thought about, okay, what are the pillars? And we've come up with three pillars. One is the external talent cloud, the internal talent marketplace, and open innovation capabilities, kind of the three legs to the stool. And then also leadership skills of what we need to change, going from the scarce mindset of I can control my workforce to this abundant mindset to say, I need outcomes. What are the tasks that need to be done, and how can I aggregate talent around those tasks to get the work that needs to get done? I think that kind of sets us up perfectly for if we can take this kind of atomization approach for
Mm,
this new world of AI, right? We can say, here are the outcomes that need to happen. And one of the scenarios I always play out is that, if you, Glenn, were just got a job as a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and your board said, your number one outcome is you got to have an AI strategy. So
yeah.
you got two alternatives, right? One is like you could go to your CHRO and you could say, hey, I need a leader, an SVP of AI, but that person's going to take 6 to 8 months to get hired, right? It's just going to be a really difficult hire. And then
Mm,
once you hire her, it's going to take 3 to 4 months to get her team hired, and then 3 to 4 months to do the strategy if you use the old process. What we're seeing develop is that great leaders think about things differently. They start with the outcome and they say, who are the smartest people in the world that might do this? I can go out to great platforms like, Invisible and Turing or Graphite, aggregate 10 experts in my field that have, good AI experience, bring them to London, sit down with my team and them and come up over a couple of days, or what are the tasks that need to be done to get a really great strategy done.
yeah.
And that could be, let's just call it 100 tasks that need to be done, and you could form teams around those tasks with the external experts and the internal folks. And in 4 to 5 weeks, you have a really good strategy.
Yeah.
So now it might not be as great as the one that takes 18 months to do, but these days in AI, that's non-relevant, right? It's like an 18-month strategy doesn't work. And so my
Yes.
sense is that's the future, right? The future is that leaders need to be more focused on outcomes. And in order to get those outcomes, they need to be able to define the tasks
Yeah.
and to quickly deploy the skills to get those tasks done. And to me, there's no other alternative but to use kind of a variable cost, more flexible workforce. So that's the goal of the book, and the book
Yeah.
is really laden with stories. I think in a good way. It was an interesting journey. It took 3 years to write and took a year to do the academic review. And at the time, I was pretty bummed about that. As you can imagine, it kind of goes into the dark hole of academia to get viewed. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, what it gave us the ability to do, the book was done before, November 22, when OpenAI started ChatGPT, and it gave us the ability to rewrite a bunch of stuff and really make sure that we had kind of the basic and fundamental thinking about what does AI mean, because I think that's going to be a big thing.
Yeah.
But I would suggest that, Open Talent is a guidebook. It's a really practical, and it's a guidebook for executives on how do you work with organizations and how do you change your organization to be ready for this new world of work. The things that we're working on now are like, what does that mean for leadership? Like, how do people lead in this new world? And
Yep.
then how do we support our workers to have more self-determination and success in their careers? I
Mm.
think we all need to look at this from a holistic standpoint. I think, EU's done a better job of taking care of the workers, because I don't know if you remember, but that question, or insight, I don't know who brought it up yesterday, in Jeff's conversation, but it was like the question. I actually, maybe you have the information, but I Googled it and I got distracted. But I think Balaji or somebody said that it used to be that it took 20,000 people to produce $1 billion of revenue, and now it takes about 200 people to produce $1 billion in revenue.
Yeah.
And that's a radical shift. If you follow that logic and Sam Altman's feelings that, it could be very soon that one person working with a bunch of freelancers could produce $1 billion in revenue.
Mm.
And so that
Mm.
dynamic, just changes the way the work gets done and the amount of resource you need to put into getting that work done.
Well, exactly. And there's the leadership part, but there's also the organizational structure as well. I mean, do we still see a lot of barriers in there, John? I mean, you've done a lot of work in this space in terms of organizations themselves. What is stopping this happening? Is it kind of the old style mindset? Is it the kind of the siloed between legal, HR, the technology folks? What's the barriers that we're still seeing, or is digitalization slowly but surely helping to wear these away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great question. I think that's where we as an industry all need to focus right now, right? Like, what is it? How best support customers in the adoption process?
Yeah.
But I think before we ask that, I was like, who is the customer? And as we were talking about before the podcast, I think historically HR is focused on, employee engagement, employee success, really looking at internal teams, whereas it was really procurement to go buy labor, contingent labor from staffing companies,
Yeah.
go buy labor from outsourcing companies. And I think that there is a movement towards this total talent, total talent leadership that HR is inevitably going to be in charge of. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's going to elevate HR to a much more strategic
Mm.
place inside organizations.
Yeah.
That said, as you and I talked, I just talked to Mark Levy, who was a former CHRO of Airbnb, and he was just relating to me the folks that he's talking to. They're overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed with return to office, like remote work. Where are my employees? Are they even working?
Right.
What does AI mean to that? And so, the idea of dealing with this total holistic approach, it might be really great from our perspective as consultants and
Mm.
small business people, or it might be great from an academic perspective. But kind of getting across that Rubicon is really, really difficult. So my sense is that, we have to really start at the organizational level and start with the end in mind. And it's like, how do we best accomplish the outcomes? And
Yeah.
then look towards organizations that are doing that. I think, as we mentioned, Ben Plummer from Invisible,
Yeah.
one of the things I'm really digging about what they're doing is they have a process orchestration platform that actually embeds AI. And so they're down to the atomization point of like, should this task be done by a human or should it be done by an AI, bot? And that those are the kind of questions. Ben's done a great job of becoming kind of the supplier of labor to OpenAI and Microsoft and Google in the
Mm.
kind of building of AI. And I think that's what we have to really look at is how are these new organizations being formed so quickly? Obviously, OpenAI couldn't do what they've done without a lot of freelance labor because they couldn't hire enough people to get that done.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
this more flexible workforce, those are the stories that need to be told, right? We need to have this kind of these lighthouses, these guiding lights to say, yeah, that's great. You've got an old software company with, 100,000 full-time employees, but the ones that are going to blow your doors off have a team of a few hundred people, but networks of teams all over the world that work on stuff
Yeah,
24/7.
yeah. And I think it's really sort of learn by doing and actually see what's best practice is sharing that when there are successful organizations who are working with this model, with this kind of blended teams, elastic
Hmm.
teams and open talent to show that this is really the future and the old ways of doing things are basically not very well set up towards the needs, wants, and requirements of the labor market of today and tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree. And then we've got, the stuff that you've done such a good job on leading is like, what does this mean from regulations and regulatory
Yeah,
and I think that's a super important issue, right? My sense is that it's a bigger issue in the U.S. because we don't have the safety nets that Europe does. I mean,
right.
other places like Mexico and South America and Asia struggle with the same things that the U.S. does without, national health care, without, good universal retirement, those kinds of things. But I think it's going to be much, much more difficult for places like the U.S. to make the transition to this. Albeit, the U.S. has a much more entrepreneurial spirit. People go out and try things. Yet without that safety net, it's going to really limit the ability for workers to kind of cross this chasm. And I get the sense that, the people that are funding a lot of these regulations, the one that spends the money on the lobbying are the traditional agencies, the traditional
Yeah.
staffing companies
Mm,
that are going to slow this process down. So I would suggest that the open talent is inevitable, that people will have portfolio careers and companies need to learn how to manage people in that way. Yet it's going to take a decade or so. This is a generational change.
right.
And I think we're seeing that play out right with the remote work and digital nomads that so many millennials are willing to do because they don't have mortgages, they don't have families with kids in school, they can go where
Right.
they want and
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of play their own little value arbitrage, right? Like the story that I love to tell is that's blown me away is that I lived on and off in this little town in Mexico, and it just exploded during COVID. And the typical use case of people I found in Sayulita was that they would be let's call them a mid-level marketing person that worked in New York pre-COVID, made 85 grand a year, but it cost them $90,000 a year to live in New York, and so they were
Right.
losing 5 grand a
Mm,
year, right? They were
mm.
scratching, they were borrowing money from their parents, they were suffering. They COVID hits, they moved to a small village, many places all over the world, Thailand, Portugal, Mexico. And, in Sayulita, people were still making their $85,000 a year salary remote working, but it cost $1,000 a year to live in an
Yes,
apartment and eat out 3 days a week. So,
definitely.
from my
Yeah.
perspective, like companies do this all the time, right? They on everything, they're looking at value arbitrage. Where can I move my production facilities? What can I do? What vendors can I use to drive down costs?
Mm,
Shouldn't workers have that same that
exactly.
same right? Shouldn't
Yes.
they have the
Yeah.
ability to do value arbitrage? And so I think that's what we're seeing. But for the guy that runs the company that's used to controlling, for the woman who runs the company that's used to controlling their labor in an office, that's just a shock to the system that's generational.
Yeah.
So it'll be really interesting to see how it all plays out.
Well, it will be really interesting, but it's the future is here already, I think, John, and I think it's just it is talent led, and we're seeing
It
much
is
more of
talent.
the war for talent as it stands at the moment. The companies and organizations having to change because it's not possible to put the square peg in the round hole anymore, and to make sure that get the right open talent on side. But really appreciate you, John, what you're doing
Oh, thanks, man.
as a standard bearer.
Uh,
As well as a cutting edge thought leader in this space. It's been fantastic for you to share a few of your thoughts, and I will put the link to Open Talent in the description as well, so people will be able to access that if they haven't done already.
Well, thanks so much, Glenn. And I really appreciate, all the great work you're doing in Europe and just being a part of the community and the dialogue. I think what we need is we need to get more people involved to be a part of the dialogue and to be
Yeah.
vocal. And so I appreciate your leadership, all the great things you've done, the communications and all the great articles and the research you're doing. So keep up the good work. And I'm not the standard bearer. It's kind of the burden is shared for all of us that, have decided this kind of crazy idea to kind of feel into the dark of the future, right? It's kind of scary. We couldn't
Absolutely.
do it without each other.
Absolutely not. Well, I'm here for the long haul with you, John. So we're going to be seeing a lot of each other. Thanks
I
for
love it.
all your support, sir.
Thanks so much.